had always loved the solitude of her family's cabin. Nestled deep within the Maine woods, it was a place where she could escape the pressures of city life. That summer, she decided to spend a week there, alone, to clear her mind and focus on her art. She loaded up her old SUV with supplies, her easel, and a box of canvases, and made the 4-hour drive to the cabin. The first few days were peaceful. She spent her mornings painting by the lake, afternoons reading on the porch, and evenings by the fire, wrapped in a blanket. The only sounds were the rustling leaves and the occasional call of a distant owl. It was perfect. On the fourth night, as Leena was drifting off to sleep, she heard a noise outside. It was faint at first, like someone whispering her name. Leena, Leena. She sat up in bed, her heart pounding. She told herself it was just the wind, or maybe a trick of her imagination. But the whispering continued, growing louder and more insistent. Leena, come outside. She grabbed her flashlight and cautiously approached the window. The moonlight cast long shadows across the clearing, but she couldn't see anything unusual. She took a deep breath and opened the door, stepping onto the porch. The air was cool, and the forest was eerily silent. Leena. The voice came from the edge of the woods. She shone her flashlight in that direction, but the beam couldn't penetrate the thick underbrush. Who's there? She called, her voice trembling. There was no response. She stood there for what felt like an eternity, listening, waiting. Finally, she turned to go back inside, but as she reached for the door, she heard footsteps behind her. She spun around, her flashlight illuminating the figure of a man standing at the tree line. He was tall and gaunt, with pale skin and hollow eyes. His clothes were torn and dirty, and his hair hung in matted clumps. But what struck Leena the most was his face. It was contorted in a grotesque imitation of a smile. Help me, he whispered, his voice a rasp. I'm lost. Leena's instinct was to run, but something about the man's eyes held her in place. They were dark, almost black, and filled with a hunger that made her skin crawl. What do you want? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Help me, he repeated, taking a step forward. Please. She backed away, her flashlight shaking in her hand. I can't help you. You need to leave. The man's smile widened, and he took another step toward her. Don't you recognize me, Leena? She froze. How do you know my name? He let out a low, guttural laugh. I've always known your name. I've been watching you. Fear gripped her heart as she realized what she was dealing with. Stories of skinwalkers, evil beings that could mimic human voices and appearances, had always been just that to her, stories. But now, standing on her porch in the dead of night, she couldn't deny the reality before her. She bolted inside and slammed the door, locking it and barricading it with a chair. The man, no, the creature, pounded on the door, its laughter echoing through the cabin. Let me in, Leena. You can't hide from me. She ran to the fireplace and grabbed a poker, her only weapon. The pounding grew louder, more insistent. Go away, she screamed, but the creature only laughed harder. The windows rattled, and she heard glass shattering in the kitchen. It was inside. She backed into the corner, clutching the poker, her eyes darting around the room. The creature's footsteps were slow and deliberate, dragging across the wooden floor. Come out, Leena, it taunted. Let's play. She held her breath, trying to make herself as small as possible. The footsteps drew closer, and she could see its shadow moving along the wall. Tears streamed down her face as she prayed for a miracle. Just as the creature reached the living room, a blinding flash of light filled the cabin. Leena screamed, covering her eyes. When she opened them, the creature was gone. The only sound was her own ragged breathing. She didn't sleep that night, or the next. By morning, she packed her things and left the cabin, vowing never to return. The woods that had once been her sanctuary were now a place of terror. As she drove away, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, and deep within the trees, something dark and hungry watched her leave, its black eyes gleaming with malevolent delight.